Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fullest Podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Bostwick, and today's guest is Liz Eddy, the co-founder and CEO of Lantern. Lantern is a venture-backed public benefit corporation on a mission to change the way we talk about and manage end of life and death. They offer free custom roadmaps to make sure you or a loved one have everything in order. Whether you're pre-planning or recently lost someone, Lantern has all of the tools, resources, and services you need to confidently manage the situation while processing the loss of a loved one. I'm so excited to get into this. Thanks, Liz, for joining us today. We're so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always amazing when anyone kind of in the wellness industry starts to see, end of life and death support as a part of it. We've always been kind of siloed in our own corner. So it's amazing to kind of bring it out of our category and into kind of the larger consciousness.
Yeah, that's, what we believe is, wellness is not just like the way you move and the food you eat. It's every aspect of your life and how you manage it and also how you manage your mood, right? And so when you're grieving, when you recently lost a loved one, or when you want to plan and kind of feel a sense of relief of like when you have something planned, if you have kids and what you're going to do, I mean, it just kind of helps you let go a little more. There's not much we can control in life, but these little things are really helpful. And having a tool like yours, it's incredible that you've gone forward with starting this company. We've had a couple people on to chat about, death planning. And we've had like a death doula on before a while ago. And then someone else who just kind of helps with cremation or non-toxic options in that sense and helping us kind of navigate different things. But I came across Lantern, I think, on social media and was just like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we need. Because when I've had those conversations, it always goes back to like, if things are pre-planned, it's just so much easier for loved ones. And you can really focus on like what you need to do, which is grieve, rather than going through the like planning process and trying to figure out what that person wanted. And so I'm really excited to just like learn more from you about Lantern. And I know that you have a history of being in social ventures. I know it started at a young age when you were just 15. I know that you were also part of the founding team of Crisis Text Line, which I think it's an incredible organization. I had the opportunity to listen to I think the founder is a woman. I listened to her at a conference and I was so inspired by her. So I'd love to kind of chat a little bit about your background before Lantern and then what led you to found Lantern.
Yeah. Well, you did a fantastic job researching. I started my first kind of social venture when I was 15. I've definitely always been someone who's very hyper aware of how I spend my time. And I think that was largely influenced by watching my dad when he was in his early 30s get diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I'm 32 now, and since he died when I was 9, I've always been just hyper aware of the fact that like time like you have on earth is not a given. You have to spend it in the way that is fulfilling for yourself, that is bettering the world, that is spent loving people and being kind. And that's always been kind of ingrained in my, I guess, DNA. So I ended up founding this social venture with 2 friends when I was 15 that was entirely meant to be a kind of one-time thing. We realized that there wasn't proper education around dating abuse and domestic violence in my high school, and wanted to do something about it, wanted to educate our peers. It affects 1 in 3 young people. It's an extremely taboo topic. And it ended up, we put together this organization and a couple of events and started working with a local shelter. And suddenly our program was getting picked up all over the US. It started getting picked up abroad. It was covered in a lot of major media. And I just completely fell in love with, primarily the mission-driven element, but also just the pace and variety of starting something. I really love that early stage unknown. You have to learn everything on the fly. I've always felt very confident in my ability to find people who are experts in lots of different categories and feeling very comfortable with learning from them. I think that's one of the biggest things in starting anything is you really shouldn't have a huge ego because we can't, as founders, know how to do everything well. We kind of have our areas of expertise, and then you surround yourself with really smart, capable people who help to grow and evolve what you're doing. And so when I graduated from college, I was still running the organization and kind of starting to step out of it. It's actually been running now for over half my life, but I haven't been involved in quite a while, and wanted to start to learn from other entrepreneurs about how to really develop a startup from scratch, well beyond what I learned as a high school student, and started working at an organization called Do Something right out of college. I was an executive assistant. And really just was able to get in the weeds on a lot of different projects and concepts, and learn about fundraising and Crisis Text Line was a conversation right as I was starting. I was actually an intern first and then an assistant. It was an early conversation, and I raised my hand and said, I really would love to help develop the initial go-to-market strategy for Crisis Text Line. I really believed in the concept of making mental health support accessible, affordable, and just removing the taboo nature around mental health. And this was already happening kind of on a national scale, a global scale of conversations around mental health becoming more common, a lot more research coming out. It was definitely becoming a hot topic. But at that beginning stage, there wasn't a ton happening digitally. It was still a lot of in-person therapy, and so I ended up developing the go-to-market strategy and being quite literally on the ground, knocking on doors in Chicago and El Paso, our two launch cities, sharing the information about Crisis Text Line, and really learning from high schools, the mayor's office, local mental health organizations about how to get this service in the hands of people that need it right when they need it, and learned a ton from that process. Ended up working on communications, brand, business development for about 7 years. And during that time frame, I was working also with children who are grieving the loss of a loved one through an organization called Experience Camps, and caregiving for my grandmother at her end of life. So I'd always known I wanted to start something. It wasn't immediately obvious to me, as a child, that it was going to be in the end of life and death space, but I'd always been really deeply passionate about the topic, particularly from a grief perspective. And then once I was in the shoes of a caregiver, I started to realize just how complex the logistics are around end of life, around legal considerations, financial planning, learning about someone's history and legacy, and then even like things that seem very sort of simple and non-important, like digital accounts and passwords and subscriptions and prescriptions and all these things that we sort of think, oh, I'll figure this out later, it's not important, suddenly become hours and hours worth of time after somebody dies if you haven't sorted through that information. So when my grandmother passed away, I got a phone call. I went to her retirement facility and was met by two police officers, a nurse, and her body, and they looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I was 27 at the time, and I had absolutely no idea what was supposed to be done. And I pulled out my phone. I Googled, what do you do when someone dies? I assumed Lantern already existed. It just seemed like a very sort of obvious solution that, at every other life moment, whether it's getting married or having kids or buying a house or buying a car or choosing a credit card, whatever it is, there are these solutions that really cover end to end everything you need to know. And then for the one thing that impacts every person on the planet multiple times throughout their life, including to our own lives, it was just a highly fragmented and confusing space. And I always like to remind people that there's no lack of innovation in this category. There are tons of amazing companies doing incredible things in the space. I mean, you mentioned that death doulas and cremation and alternative solutions, and there's online will makers and grief counseling, and you can find everything on every corner of the map. But the problem I recognize is that the average person doesn't know how to find this information or even know what to call it. Like a lot of people don't know what a death doula is. And if they knew, they would probably want to use it, but they're just not aware that it's even available to them. And so when we first started developing Lantern with my co-founder, Alyssa, and our technical lead, Shay, it really was about, okay, how do we look at this really from a user perspective of a singular experience of, my mom is dying, my mom has died. That's how an individual user looks at the space. And so how do we make it so that they can navigate it exactly through the lens that they're taking it versus, sending someone to 35 different websites to try to figure it out.
Yeah, I love it. I love the concept. I think that it's needed, and I'm excited to learn more about all of it. There were so many things in there that I love that you shared. And I completely agree in terms of being a founder and not having an ego, because it's really everyone else that's helping you on this mission together, and not one person is doing everything. And yeah, it's a beautiful story about how you ended up in this space. It makes so much sense. I mean, just at age 9, going through such a huge loss and then coming through it with this, it's so beautiful. So I'd love to kind of just like learn more about, I mean, I know that you have, I want to get into the funeral planning checklist and like what items you think should be on everyone's list, but I know that you guys offer so much more. So how does it work? Like, let's say I wanted to go on and just for myself, right? And just have that like pre-planned. You mentioned there's so many, I didn't even think about like passwords to social accounts and just anything like that at all. So that's incredible that you guys incorporate all that, but it sounds like it's super customized. Is it a platform that does that for you? Are you working with someone specifically? What are the costs associated with it? Like, how does this work?
Yeah. So really there are like 3 different use cases that people come to us for. One is, as you said, planning for the future for yourself. And that could be, you could be a 27-year-old with no reason in the world to think you're dying anytime soon, but you're thinking about getting your things in order. Maybe you're having a kid, or you bought a house, you're getting married. You've experienced the loss of someone else and you're just realizing the importance of it. The second use case is you're planning for somebody else. We do see a lot of times folks who are more comfortable with digital solutions, helping their parents or their grandparents plan for themselves. And then the third is an immediate need. So someone has died and now you're actually navigating that process in real time. On the pre-planning side, we walk people through end to end all the legal, financial, logistical, and emotional considerations around planning for yourself or for someone else. So that could be the things that I think people typically expect, which is like wills and trusts. It can also be advanced care planning. So how do you want to be cared for at your end of life, or if you're not able to speak for yourself? And then as we said, like your digital legacy, what happens to your Instagram and your TikTok if you die? There's a lot of elements I think that we forget in future planning that somebody else will have to take care of on your behalf. So there's this is a way to really handle as much as you possibly can and hand over a gift to your loved ones that is, here, I've given you the gift of time, the gift of less anxiety, the gift of organization, so that you can focus on your grief and on your mental and emotional health, which oftentimes without these plans in place, your loved ones end up spending the first few months after you die just trying to keep their head above water, whether that be financially or dealing with probate, or there are a lot of things that can keep people into hundreds of hours worth of work after you're gone.
Yeah. And so how does that work? Like, in terms of cost, like it's just a custom cost. Is there a base fee? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, for pre-planning, we have a free version of the platform, and then we have a premium version. The premium version is $149. I will just flag for those listening, if you have an employer who is generous with benefits, we do offer Lantern through employee benefits. So a lot of employers will give Lantern for free to their employees. So it's worth asking for.
Wow. And it's a one-time cost?
Yeah, we have the $149 is a one-time cost, and then we just have a small maintenance fee just for like the storage of that information. So part of the benefit of doing a digital plan is that you have secure storage of all of that information for as long as you need it. And so we store all of those documents and have a digital beneficiary associated with that account. So if something happens to you, that person will be able to gain access to that information.
interrupting this podcast to tell you about Hillary Pearlson, Akashic Records reader, intuitive guide, and founder of The Dreamery, who is sharing a limited time offer to join the Akashic Portal as a founding member for the Fullest community. For those new to the Akashic Records, you can think of them as an energetic library or archive filled with everything that every soul has ever thought, said, and done over the course of its existence, from past lives to present life and all future possibilities. The Akashic Portal is your comprehensive guide to co-creating with the Akashic Records. Part course, part community, this is the grounded foundation and support you need to enter openly into the Akashic Records and create the kind of connection, clarity, and experience you've been looking for. Every step of the portal pathway is intentionally designed to prepare you and guide you into the limitless miracles and possibilities that exist in your everyday life. Join now to become a founding member and receive 50% off the Akashic Portal with code THEFULLEST. Learn more at thedreamery.com/portal. That's the DREAMERIE.com/portal. Code THEFULLEST for 50% off. I think it's really interesting talking about pre-planning because it's something that you can do with loved ones as well. Like, let's say I wanted to, do this with my parents before that there is any sort of diagnosis or before anything. So you can, it's not necessarily as difficult of a conversation. Like, it's always going to be difficult, but it's like probably a little less because it's still this thing or this point in the future that you don't necessarily feel like is happening right now, but you feel that you can work towards. So I'm curious if it's something that people gift to each other, like other than an employer doing.
Yeah, so what we typically see in those cases is somebody will create a plan for themselves and then they will encourage like family members, friends to also create their own plans. You can actually have multiple plans within your account, so you can continue to purchase pre-plans and store them individually within one system. So it makes it a lot easier for families, particularly that we're kind of trying to keep everything in order. But I mean, I love the idea of gifting it to someone. I think that's a really beautiful and amazing thing. I would love, I haven't heard somebody do that, but that just means they haven't sent me an email saying they have, but I'm sure it happens.
Yeah, I'm like, I need to do this. I think it's just really interesting. I'm curious how, it's such a tough topic for so many people. How do you get the word out? And is it typically word of mouth? Like you mentioned, it's like someone doing it, feeling really great about it and sharing it, or, how do you share about it with others, and how do you get on the B2B side, like work with different organizations?
Yeah, so the pre-planning and the after loss side of the platform are pretty different. So the second part that we didn't talk about yet is in the immediate need when something happens. We have a self-service platform that walks you through day by day everything you need to know, from all the aspects of funeral planning to navigating benefits, Social Security, figuring out how to find a lost life insurance policy, change a car title, close a Facebook account, like truly anything you can imagine that would come up. And then we have a concierge service that goes along with that. So you can hire a consultant who can quite literally change the car title for you at the DMV, or close that Instagram account, or help to stop prescriptions coming from CVS and just take all that stuff off your plate. So the way people hear about it typically, a lot of it is word of mouth, Google search. We have pretty strong SEO on our platform, so we do get a lot of people that just sort of stumble upon us as they're searching for this kind of information. We are doing a lot of really interesting collaborations recently. So like one of them is with Zola, the wedding site. And so we're working on, we did sort of an initial launch, and we're launching a whole bunch of other amazing things, some content videos around grief and weddings, and pre-planning after weddings. So part of it is just around what it's like to deal with grief and loss while you're wedding planning and during your wedding. A lot of like tips and guidance and just sharing experiences, storytelling. And then on the other side of it, how important it is after you get married to put these plans in place and make sure you're prepared. And so that's like, we're definitely, as I mentioned early on in the podcast, is like, a lot of what we've been doing is trying to step out of the sort of expected areas where this topic comes up. Because the reality is that end of life and grief infiltrates every part of a human's life. There is no corner of it where it doesn't exist. And once you've lost someone, anyone listening that has lost someone knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like your wedding day, or the day your baby's born, or the day you buy a house, or anything exciting and happy does not have that tinge of grief experience alongside it. It becomes a part of who you are. And so we've realized that, we can't just exist in this one category. We can't just be existing in, funeral homes and hospice care. It really has to be a part of our regular lives. And in order to best accomplish our goal of normalizing this conversation, we have to start talking about it once you're 18. The second you turn 18, you should start doing an end of life plan. It should be something you update every year. It should be something that your families discuss regularly. It doesn't have to be sad and depressing. And honestly, it isn't if you're doing it in a regular way. When it becomes sad and depressing is when you do it when someone is dying. That is incredibly challenging. And for whatever reason, up until this point, that's kind of been the time where we've decided is when you should be doing your end of life plans. And it's far more challenging when you're doing it then.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love that you're encouraging people to do it as soon as they turn 18. I think that's so important. And having a collaboration though with Zola makes so much sense. You're getting married, and there's a company that I recently launched that I just started looking into and potentially working with, and they're called Little Honey Money, and it's actually like a baby registry website for moms and babies to get like the care that they need postpartum, as well as whatever the baby needs. But I think that's also, again, another milestone that would encourage people to start doing the end of life planning. So that's exciting that you guys are doing stuff like that, and I'd love to connect you with them as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we're definitely looking to do kind of in a similar vein to what we're doing with Zola, with anything from buying a home, having a baby, dating. Like there are so many different areas where this comes up.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we're very, very open and excited to discuss it. Because it doesn't have to be, we don't have to be so guarded about this topic. And I think a lot of times we think that the fear of talking about death, or the fear of death in general, is like a human condition. And the reality is it's really like an American condition. There are many cultures all over the world that are very open and comfortable with talking about this very real reality. I mean, it's just as natural and normal as birth, and we need to provide the same level of respect and support for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I know we talked about this, but like, why do you think our culture has taken this long to think more proactively about death than like other cultures?
I I think it's largely just been we've treated it very much as a negative, as something that we are meant to avoid or to defeat in some way. I believe a lot of that is largely driven by how our healthcare systems work. I've spoken to a lot of doctors, and we're working in some healthcare systems, and I'm learning, it's starting to change, and there's a lot of really incredible like medical professionals who are trying to change this as well. But even when you're in medical school, you're typically taught, you keep people alive at all costs, and that's your job. And if somebody dies, it's a failure to that medical intervention or that system. And first of all, that's insane pressure on a healthcare professional to assume that like you have to keep everybody alive, right? Because it's impossible. Like you can't. And it's not a failure as long as you've done everything that you can, and that the person hopefully died in the way that they wanted to. Like that's the ideal situation. And I think I dying well is a huge thing that I'm deeply passionate about. We can get into that more, but I think when we have this mentality that it's keep people alive at all costs, it's there's so much money being sunken into the idea of living forever, especially in Silicon Valley, and not enough time being spent on, okay, well, maybe at some point, possibly there could be a world where we live longer, or in a dream world live forever, or whatever it is. But that's not the case now, and it's not the case anytime soon, and it's certainly not going to be the case for people that don't have a lot of wealth. And so we need to be really focused on what's happening now and how to take care of people as they experience something incredibly natural.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like even the wellness industry, right? We're promoting quality of life and longevity, and again, it's like, stay alive at all costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of dying well, like what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, the term dying well, it has a lot of different definitions, but I mean, generally people tend to be like, oh, you're old, it's peaceful, it's not painful, it's at home, it's surrounded by loved ones, it's hearing your favorite music, there's a sense of, generally when you ask people, they're like, I hope I die in my sleep, right? Like, you have this idea of like what it is. And in the US, it's really kind of wild, is that 8 in 10 people say they want to die at home, but only 20% of people actually do. And that's largely because there is a huge lack of advanced care directives. There's a lack of access to hospice and awareness of those services available to you. There's a lack of end of life caregiving alternatives. So we find that a lot of people, they don't end up being able to die the way that they want to. They haven't had that information in place or even known that they were supposed to. And also a lot of times people, even if they do have advanced care directives and these things in order, the healthcare professionals and their family members aren't even aware of it. They don't know that you've done it. They don't know where it's stored. I mean, with my grandmother, she had information that was on a printed piece of paper in a hall closet inside of a plastic bin. Like, when she died, how was I supposed to know that was there? It becomes something you find out later, and honestly is something I think a lot of people feel really heavy guilt around, is having to make end of life decisions for someone they love without knowing what they actually wanted. It's a very challenging thing. And then of course, like you can't deny in the dying well aspect, a huge component of this is, gun violence and police brutality and the opioid epidemic. And there are a lot of people that are not afforded the opportunity or the option to die the way that they want to. And largely impacting communities of color. And so, you'd be remiss to not mention that it's not just about the documentation. There's also, this entire other element of our systems that are in place.
Oh, I know it's so devastating, and I'm curious, like, what is it that you feel? I know that I was on your social media and you shared a little bit about that, like the numbers are just not equal. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel like Lantern can kind of come in and support that?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is normalizing the conversation, as we said. So trying to reach into different communities and different elements of our culture, through like movies, television, celebrities, like whoever you're listening to and learning from, being able to really open up and talk about this topic. I was recently chatting with the actress Billie Lourd, who is absolutely amazing, and she was talking about how stories about death and grief and loss need to be elevated in Hollywood, and how important it is for the normalization of these conversations for culture as a whole. That's an incredibly important element. And then in terms of what Lantern can really control, it's about access. It's about making sure that what we're offering it's easy, it's motivating, it's affordable, and pleasant in some ways. As I said, like if you're doing this at a time where you don't feel like you're on like a ticking clock, it can be a really pleasant experience. And when we talk about wellness, it's not just financial wellness, it's also and wellness for people that you care for, but it's also there's a lot of research about how acknowledging your own mortality can actually make you a happier person. And so how do we help people to see that this doesn't have to be a miserable, time consuming, like trudge my way through it kind of experience, but it can actually be an opportunity to really reflect on what you want for yourself, what you want for your family, what you want your great grandchildren to know about you, what do you want to teach people, and then also how do you want to spend your time, who do you want to spend it with, what do you want to be doing. It's so important to really like continue to check in on yourself. And I think we've built the Lantern pre-plan to be, of course, yes, there are legal documents and financial decisions to make, but it's also about, thinking about who you want to be and how you want to leave your loved ones.
I'm curious, like, what you recommend in terms of funeral planning and like the checklist that you guys provide, and also just like how long the process takes. Obviously, it's different for people whether they have a business that they need to figure out what's going to happen to their home, to their children, to pets. Like, it depends on what you have to leave over. But I'm curious, like, how long the process typically takes.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It's highly, highly dependent on a person's situation, and also, how much, on the after law side, how much pre planning the person has done. So the more pre planning you do, the less time there is on the back end after you're gone. Generally, with a pre plan, it's really kind of a choose your own adventure. You can make it as detailed or as little information as you want. That's kind of the hard part, right, of end of life planning, is there's no legal obligation to do any of this. It's really about how you want to leave things for your loved ones, and how you want to be cared for yourself at your end of life. And so the way we've designed it is really you can chip away at it over time. It's not something that you have to sit down and do all of it in one day. I think a lot of times people think like, oh, I don't have enough time in this day or this week or this month to get this done. And so we really have designed it to be very bite-sized pieces, very digestible, easy to come back and finish later. So you could say, okay, I have 20 minutes right now between two meetings. I'm going to, just jump through a couple of questions. Most of it is multiple choice. You can always go back and continue to develop it out over time. So that was a very important thing for us, is making sure that it didn't feel like you had these huge chunks of information that you had to fill in. And if you look at other sites, or you work with an estate planner, that's a lot of times how it comes off. It's like you get asked these huge, like, life altering questions, like what do you want to have happen to your body after you die? And if you hear that question, you're like, oh my gosh, like, what are my options? How much do they cost? Like, what is the environmental impact? What do other people choose? Like, all these things happen in your mind. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I can't deal with this. I can't do this right now. And
Totally.
so instead, we have taken little pieces of the process. So, like, simple things like, have you decided what you want done with your body after you die? And you can be like, no, I haven't decided that yet. I'll come back to it. Okay, you haven't decided. Here are some of the more common things that people choose. Do you want to select one of these? And then you can learn more about them if you want to, and just really helping people to slowly develop that perspective and opinion as you go. So it really does make a huge difference. And then on the after law side, I mean, the average, there's so many different numbers that get thrown around. We estimate the average person takes about 168 hours to do all of the things themselves after somebody dies. Of course, if you utilize like a concierge service, like what Lantern offers, you can chip away at those hours and hand those off to someone else. But it's quite a lot. I mean, it's like taking on another full-time job.
Wow. So 168 hours when using Lantern, but you chip away at it one little by little.
168 hours if you do it completely on your own.
Oh,
So
okay.
through
Yeah.
our self-serve product. There are some sites that estimate it can take up to 500 hours to get everything
Wow.
done. So I mean, and the reality is it's really just like, how much help do you have and how complex is the estate? There are a lot of different factors that go into
Yeah.
it.
But I mean, 168 isn't like that bad if you're pre-planning and you take it over time and you just kind of sign up and you chip at it little by little. Like you could get it done in a year.
Yeah, yeah, and on
Yeah.
the pre-planning side, it doesn't have to take that long. It's
Yeah.
really just a matter of how detailed you want to be. It's really after a death that you get a lot of the, like, intensive long hours of work, because you're dealing with things like calling the DMV, right? Like, if anyone has ever tried to get in touch with the DMV, like, good luck to you.
Totally.
And that's just one piece of the process. And so our Lantern guides, that's exactly what they do. Is they say, okay, you handle talking to the funeral home, and I'll take on contacting the DMV and closing all of these social media accounts. And you're able to kind of choose how involved you want your consultant to be with you. They can quite literally do everything, or they can just take off certain pieces that you just don't want to deal with.
Wow. And what if you like, just out of curiosity, what have you seen like when people, let's say, own their own business? You guys offer different ways to support, like you mentioned. You said a business can work with you by offering this as an option in terms of benefits for their employees. Then you also work with businesses. What is it, like a bereavement plan? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, so we work with employers to help them. Well, first of all, we provide Lantern as a benefit to their employees, and then we also help them with, like, their bereavement policies, procedures, making sure they have all their resources in place, training their management to navigate the loss of an employee or an employee losing someone they love. So yeah, we get really in the weeds with our employer
Yeah.
partners.
And then what about like sole proprietors on your platform and like options for their business? Like how do you offer that?
Yeah, so usually we have a set of questions that are associated with that, but usually you cover a lot of that information when you work on your will. That is a big component. We usually recommend that people have, they outline their wishes for their business in their will, and then they also make sure that beneficiary has access to all of the necessary contacts. So actually, I had this conversation recently with a friend who's a therapist, and she was saying, in her will, she has a list of all of her clients. And she has gone to each of those clients and said, hey, if you hear from this person, it means something has happened to me. So that it's very
Wow.
clear that, all of the people that she works with know and are properly taken care of. And so, yeah, that's a highly organized business owner.
Yeah.
But yes, but
They
it's
need, I
very
mean,
important.
her clients, she's in a business where her clients need support and she doesn't want to leave them hanging. And then all of a sudden she's like abandoned them. If they have an
Yeah.
abandonment wound, then it's like a whole, or whatever, like people need to know. Because there are a lot of people that are working on their own and, have an amazing consulting career or freelancing or whatever. And that's really important. Even like, for example, my children, they both have genetic conditions, and their endocrinologist ended up closing his practice. And obviously, so I was able to get that email. But what if something had happened to them and to him, the doctor? And then, I'm like, I need to have a specialist because this is a deadly condition. It's
Yes,
just,
absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and that's also, another component too, right, of doing your end of life planning is around guardianship and making sure that, whomever would take care of your kids if something happened to you, that they have all the doctor's information and, allergies and medications and making sure that all of that information is outlined as well. I mean, the gift of knowledge is not to be
yeah,
misunderstood. It's incredibly, incredibly important. And I also just like flag too, because we're a venture backed company, and I tend to get on my soapbox with our investors about how they should be requiring any of the people they invest in to have an end of life plan.
yeah,
Because yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize that their equity, that their business can get tied up in a probate process. Like there is no shortage of things that can happen, other than, of course, just the devastation of having, a founder or anybody on a team die. But then dealing with what could be years of legal complications. Yeah, you have to be really like clear about what it is that you want.
yeah. I love that. So, if there's one message that you could leave listeners around taking control of their end of life, like what would that be?
I think it's really two parts. So one is, I think, like the phrase estate planning is a pretty terrible name. It sort of makes people assume that you have to quite literally own an estate in order to do it. Everybody should be doing it, whether you have tens of millions of dollars or a dollar to your name. And then second, it's what I was saying before, that it doesn't have to be a sad, complicated, or even unpleasant process. And I hear, especially from like young parents, that they've actually had some fun with it by, leaving humorous notes, writing inside jokes, adding photos to their plan that would make their loved ones laugh. Like it can be a really meaningful thing. And I always get like a little bit emotional thinking about, with when my dad passed away, like he had his legal documents in order, but he didn't do anything around his like history or his legacy. And so I've lived my life not having much other than what people tell me about him, and like what I would give to have, a recording of his voice sharing stories, or to hear how he felt the day he proposed to my mom, or what he was thinking the day I was born. Like this is all stuff that I'll just never know. And so I think for parents especially, like I think that probably would speak to you. But it's such an
Totally.
important part of this process.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that. Well, I mean, I'm totally tearing up from that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. I love your story. I love what you've created. I think it's so necessary. And like you said, it affects us all, and it's something that we should all be doing, whether you're a founder of a venture backed company like you mentioned, or a sole proprietor, or just someone with a family, someone who even, maybe your family has passed but all you have is a pet. Like, you still need to think about that. And so I really appreciate you having it be your mission to share this with people and make it easier to do that, because it is so overwhelming. And to have a platform that just guides you through it and makes it easy, and like you mentioned, allows the opportunity and encourages you to have little sweet notes like that, and whether that's a voice note or images that you can share, that's incredible. And I'm so inspired by what you've created. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I really appreciate it.